Hello and welcome to GOLDENAGERS. Our show looks at issues that involve people over 55, the boomers and beyond. You know, never before has there been such a great need for new ways of thinking in the aging arena. For example, just 100 years ago, 50 was considered a ripe old age. Well, we've added nearly 35 years to the average life expectancy now. And GOLDENAGERS will be bringing you new ideas and paths to use for these extra years. Living to be in one's 80s, 90s, or hundreds is great if a person has vitality. Without it, though, it's a glum situation. So with us today is Ernie Hubbard. He is the founder of a local research center. Their mission is to discover the principles of vitality in aging. The name of his center is To Live Well Marin. For more than 40 years, Ernie has studied biology, genetics, and biochemistry. He's taken all this studying and put it into the understanding of how we age. Welcome, Ernie.
Thank you, Maya. It's great to be here.
Well, have you found the fountain of youth?
I found some drops. I found some droplets. Yeah. I've been searching for them, and it's starting to rain a little bit.
So is that in the cells that you've told me about in the past, about water and the cells when we're young?
It's great that you bring water up, because when I first started studying human aging about 10 years ago intensely, it took me back to the ocean. I thought it was going to take me into the distant future, and I was going to be working in all these cutting-edge, high-tech approaches to aging. And every time I ask a serious question about why we age, it spun me 180 degrees and took me back to the sea. And many of the answers about why we age are in the ocean and in the organisms that live there.
Well, I know we have a picture of you in the ocean, actually hunting around for, what are you hunting around for when you're out there?
At that time, I was interested in the electrical charges that are in our bodies and how electricity changes as we age. And I knew that the oldest living organisms on the planet live in the sea. Some of them live so long we can't even measure their age. So I took some very sophisticated voltmeters down to the tide pools at Point Lobos, and I actually measured the voltages of the sea creatures down there and found out that they are completely neutral electrically. They have no voltage at all. They're completely balanced, and we're not. And that was the first big hint I had that there was something fundamental about human aging that was very different and that had changed since our early origins in the ocean.
Well, certainly the oldest person on planet Earth was a French woman, I believe, who lived to be 122 years old.
That's correct, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Well, her name was Jeanne Calment, and she remains the oldest documented living person. And she, because of her age at 122, has defined the human lifespan. And the human lifespan differs from human life expectancy in that the human lifespan is the longest period of time that a human has ever lived, that we can document. So as far as we know, no one has ever lived longer than 122 years. And that's the question. Is Jeanne Calment defining the absolute maximum of the human lifespan? And during that 122 years, was she living optimally up to that 122nd year? So part of my research is not only about how long can we live, but how well can we live for each of those 122 years, or however many they are.
So, Ernie, how do you define aging? I know you have a whole way of defining it.
Well, let's talk about aging for a minute as a concept of vitality, and whether or not we are vital or are not, whether our vitality is increasing or not, because chronological aging happens to every organism. You and I are older now than when we started talking during this program.
Oh, no.
Yes. And children age at the same rate as adults. So the chronological process of aging happens to all living organisms through the dimension of time. But the question is, how vital are we at any age? And so my study has not been the study of aging only, it's been the study of vitality. And what I came to find was that there are at least 7 dimensions to vitality in our lives. And they range from the core energy that we need to actually have cells that can function, all the way to our highest creative and spiritual self.
You have a wonderful slide on this, don't you?
I do. In fact, the slide describes the model of human aging, and it's called 7 circles, which I later found out is a Native American paradigm. I went to go reserve the domain name 7circles.com, and I found out it was already reserved by an American Indian tribe. And that led me to understand that that was a sacred paradigm, which was very interesting to me because I have found 7 dimensions of human vitality, and I've been looking for the 8th and I haven't found it yet. But the model is a series of concentric circles, beginning with energy, to cellular vitality, to membrane and tissue vitality, and the 4th dimension is actually our physical bodies. And that's in the middle of the model, and I call it the fulcrum of vitality, because it's right in the balance between what I call the fundamental foundational levels and the higher levels of vitality. So the 5th dimension, once you have a healthy body, is your mind, your heart, your emotions as an integrated whole with your body. Once I have become an integrated human being at that level, I can form relationships. And so relational or community vitality becomes a very, very important aspect of our overall vitality. We were not designed to live in isolation. And the highest level of vitality then becomes our spiritual and creative selves, either individually or as communities. And it's a very exciting model because when I sit down with someone and we start talking about their vitality, I know exactly where I'm going to start. I'm going to start at that first circle and say, where are you with respect to your energy? And it turns out energy is the biggest single question and issue that people have with whom I've worked over the last 10 years, of almost any age. When I sit down with people and say, so what are you mainly concerned with? Almost everybody will list energy as either the first or second key priority.
Well, I mean, we wouldn't even be here having this conversation if we were in our teens or 20s or 30s, because very rarely do you hear them saying, I'm tired, I've run out of energy. I hear that a lot in my circles these days. But evidently there is a time in which the tipping point with energy.
Right, that's a wonderful point, and it's another fundamental discovery I made, and I made it through the process of testing many thousands of people here in Marin and the North Bay. And what I found was that at about the age of 35, something was happening with the people I was testing. And it wasn't obvious on the surface because I would see young 20-year-old men and women, I'd see young 35-year-old men and women, young 40-year-old men and women, and they looked all vital. But when I would start to measure them and when I would start to get to know them, I would find that there's something changing at about the mid-30s. And what I came to understand was that biology has a fundamental requirement to take care of the young, because it needs them to grow up and be fertile, to have the next generation, and to be strong enough to take care of the little darlings. At about 35, biology seems to say, thanks a lot, I've got to go take care of the kids. And what happens after 35 is a very interesting aspect of our lives, and it's one of the great periods of challenge to our vitality, because as I tell people, biology no longer has its hand on your steering wheel. Now, if you want to put your hand back on it, that's your business. Or if you just want to let things happen as they do, then you're not quite sure where that's going to end up. So I spend a lot of time with people developing plans so that they can put their hands back on their own steering wheel and navigate that course to optimal vitality after they're 35. So I work with people of all ages.
So give us a plan, just a random plan of someone that you're working on now or in the past.
Sure.
So we can get a feeling of what it entails.
So a typical situation for me would be, let's just say, a 40-year-old mother of 2. And I meet her either at my center or at the Preventive Medical Center of Marin, where I work with doctors and naturopaths. And I would ask her, well, what are your challenges? What are your goals? Why are you here? And oftentimes it would be something like this. I'm fatigued. I am gaining weight and I don't know why. I eat like a bird, I work out like a horse, and I've got muffin tops. What's with that? I'm not sleeping well. My relationships with people are changing, and I'll look at myself in the mirror and sometimes I don't know who I am. And my skin is changing, I'm losing hair. A lot of things that are kind of combined in there. And so I'll ask them, well, what are you doing for minerals in your diet? Because you need trace minerals, and that's an important part of the energy dimension. So we start with energy.
Okay, because our show is geared towards people older than 40, can we jump ahead to say 60, 70, 80, or even
Absolutely.
beyond? I don't know if you're dealing with people that are over 100, but let's pretty much stay in that arena.
Sure. Okay. Well, so a typical example there would be a 70-year-old man. I saw one yesterday. Generally fit, as many men and women are in Marin County, and he came to me and said, I know that people say I look fit, but the truth is I'm fatigued a lot. And the same kinds of issues, fatigue and energy and weight, will often be at the top of his list. And so we will start with the same process with him. And I'll say, let's start and ask a question. Let's rule out the probability that you are lacking core energy in the form of electrolytes in your diet. And 99% of the people in that age category, when I ask them if they are getting adequate trace minerals, will say, well, sure, I eat well. And
trace minerals are electrolytes?
Trace minerals are the electrolytes that are in the ocean, and they are comprised of the 80 or 90 minerals that are in seawater, which used to be in our food when they were in the soil. But after 200 years of intensive farming, it's now been proven that the trace minerals that were once there are no longer there. So people are operating under the assumption that they're getting their core electrolytes from their food when they're not. And that leads to a host of other issues and symptoms that affect their vitality. And after the age of 55, obviously, those challenges become greater and greater and greater.
I would like to show our audience this book. It's Ernie's book, and it's 10 Proven Safe and Natural Ways to Enhance Your Vitality, The Vital Journey. And maybe, Ernie, you could tell us a little bit about this?
Well, earlier this year, Maya, when I decided to put my website out after about 10 years of research, I wanted to provide people an opportunity to obtain a non-scientific how-to book based on my research discoveries. And so the Vital Journey actually is a navigational guide for people who don't necessarily want to bury themselves in biochemistry, genetics, go out to the tide pools with their voltmeters and do all that. They just want to know, well, I need a quick reference point about how to start my journey, how to know if I'm getting where I want to go, and what are the tools that I need along the way. And so it's really a how-to manual of natural approaches to optimal vitality.
So along with the electrolytes, and electrolytes meaning minerals, pretty much, what else would you be helping this person?
So in the first dimension of energy, I generally work with people in electrolytes and making sure that they have adequate electrolytes. And I also help people get grounded to the earth using a process called earthing, which is a very popular new movement across natural health circles, and it involves reconnecting your body to the earth using a variety of means, including, if you're lucky enough, taking a walk on a wet seashore. But there are other ways to earth people, and what that does is it helps neutralize those voltages that I was talking about. The idea is to get people back to their electrically ancient selves. And from there we start working on cellular nutrition, and that's where the whole field of nutrition comes in, because once you have adequate energy, then you have the fuel to actually build healthy cells.
Well, I love this whole thing about cells because you explained to me when we talked earlier how there's a lot of water in young cells, and there's no or very, very little water in aging cells, and I loved that slide that you showed me,
Right.
because it really put it in perspective. Maybe you could talk on that a bit.
Sure. Well, hydration is not only essential for vital living at any age, but it is a very easily measurable parameter. So I have devices that I can use and very non-invasively measure the water in a person's body. And I usually measure two types of water. I measure the total water in the body as a percentage of a person's weight, and I measure how much of the water in the body is inside the cells versus outside the cells. And I tell people it's either got to be inside your cell or outside. Mm-hmm. And your skin, thankfully, is keeping it all in the body. But it turns out that young people have extremely hydrated cells. And if you think about a bunch of ripe grapes for a minute, compared with a bunch of dried raisins, what is it that's bringing the water into those grapes? Well, the water's being pumped into the grapes, and that's what happens in young cells. The water's being pumped in there with proteins that are on the cell membranes. So healthy cells at any age have very, very healthy pumps. And guess what those pumps need? They need minerals. And they need energy. So about a third of all the energy you'll ever consume in your life is running those pumps to keep them hydrated. Well, if you start lacking good nutrition and electrolytes, and we're going to talk about stress a little later, stress is in your life, that is going to affect the ability of those pumps to hydrate the cells. And once the cells start to lose water, then not only do they not function very well, but the tissues that those cells comprise start to function poorly. So when you look at age-related issues such as kidney issues, heart, liver, lung, oftentimes when you look at those cells under the microscope, they're very dehydrated. And I tell people it's like they've pulled away from each other until they get out of cell phone range. And they can't communicate and do the same organ-specific thing anymore. So helping people hydrate their cells is a huge part of what I do.
Well, let me just take a bit of water with that. In this, a lot of people think that water will help that, just drinking water, but evidently just drinking water does not help this at all. Well, because in our culture we just hear water, right. water, drink right. water, but evidently it doesn't help this.
Well, if the
and
water
we have about a minute, Ernie, for your response on this.
Well, if the water doesn't have minerals in it, then what you're really doing is you're leaching the few remaining minerals that you might have left. And my father died of overconsumption of water. He actually had a stroke and leached all the minerals out of his brain, and that was long before I knew anything about this. But I look back on that and wish I'd known some of those things, because I would have stopped him from drinking copious amounts of water. I tell people, if you eat lots of fruits and vegetables and drink water or fluids when you're thirsty, you're getting enough water.
Well, I'm glad I got the water, because I really feel I need a lot of water in my body right now. But we also need more than just water in our bodies, and for the vital life. And living under constant stress is also another big vitality drain. And Ed Dukowski has more on that.
To quote the American Psychological Association's website, in the early 1980s, psychologist Janice Kiko Glaser, Ph.D., and her husband, immunologist Ronald Glaser, Ph.D., of the Ohio State University College of Medicine, were intrigued by animal studies that linked stress and infection. From 1982 through 1992, these pioneer researchers studied medical students. Among other things, they found that the students' immunity went down every year under the simple stress of the 3-day exam period. Test takers had fewer natural killer cells, which fight tumors and viral infections. They almost stopped producing immunity-boosting T cells. The website continues, those pioneer findings opened the floodgates of research. By 2004, there were nearly 300 studies on stress and health. Some of the findings discovered that for stress of any significant duration, from a few days to a few months or years, as happens in real life, all aspects of immunity went downhill. Thus, long-term or chronic stress through too much wear and tear can ravage the immune system. Finally, according to the American Psychological Association, the newest findings on social stress underscore the value of good friends. Even just a few close friends can help someone feel connected and stay strong. Social ties may indirectly strengthen immunity because friends, at least health-minded friends, can encourage good health behaviors such as eating, sleeping, and exercising well. Good friends also help to buffer the stress of negative events. So our takeaway from this segment today is maintain strong social ties for top senior vitality. For Golden Agers, this is Ed Dudkowski.
Wow, those people really were having a bad day. I'm so glad we're having a good day here. And joining us to make it even a better day is Corrine Rosenblatt. She has graciously volunteered to be stressed out by Ernie. So here we go. Ernie, we've talked in the first part of the show about the trials and tribulations of vitality, and of course being stressed out is another huge area in our society and how fast we're all going. So it seems to me like probably everybody's stressed out to some, I mean, of course in the piece that we just saw, that was probably a bit much. How did you react to it?
Well, first of all, those folks in the piece we just saw, Maya, are classic examples of extreme chronic stress coupled with extreme acute stress. And that represents one of the major causes of unhealthy aging in our world today, especially in our modern culture. The acute stress that we are designed to express when we are under a threat or when we are needing to use our bodies is a natural and good thing. Acute stress is called the fight-flight response. And when we need to fight or flee, it's important that our body respond to that. That's a very natural thing. You see it in wild animals all the time. What you don't often see, though, in wild animals and mammals is chronic stress. And in fact, there's a great book called Why Don't Zebras Get Ulcers? Well, zebras don't get ulcers because they're not chronically stressed.
How do we know that?
Because we can measure it.
Okay.
And it turns out that the unconscious nervous system, which is responsible for both acute and chronic stress, generates a whole series of electrical signals that we can now measure. And that has become a very important part of my work in helping people live optimal lives, optimally vital lives, especially after the age of 55, because the ability to manage chronic stress diminishes unless we really focus on making sure that we're not stressed. And once chronic stress sets in, that sets in motion a whole series of physical, physiological, and biochemical changes that accelerate the aging process and really make our lives very, very unpleasant. And if you know people who are under chronic stress, you know what I'm talking about. It affects every aspect of our lives.
Now, Ernie, is this test that you're about to give Corrine, is this something that you do at your office?
Yes, I test people to determine, first of all, whether their unconscious nervous system is in fact out of balance, and many times it is. And then we can administer a coaching program to actually help them restore that natural balance, because the body and the mind have not lost the memory of how to be unstressed. But in the everyday lives we live with all of their various stressors, it's often easy to forget that. So this is a way to, one, measure, two, to allow each person in the program to actually see what their unconscious nervous system is doing, and three, through a very focused breathing program and guided imagery to help them restore that natural system. And the effects are immediate. When people de-stress, they can feel it immediately, and it becomes a self-reinforcing process in their lives that they can practice long after they leave their session with me.
So where is your office? I know it's in Marin somewhere.
Yes, I have a clinic and a laboratory in South Marin between Sausalito and Mill Valley. And then I also work at Preventive Medical Center of Marin in Terra Linda, just north of downtown San Rafael, with Dr. Elson Haas, Dr. Michael Rosenbaum, and a great series of brilliant healers, physicians, and naturopaths up there.
So what are you about to do to poor Corinne?
Well,
She's getting nervous. I can seem stressed out by the moment.
Well, actually, the good news is that if Corinne came in and was stressed, this process is going to help her relieve it. And this is a technology that was developed by a wonderful company named HeartMath down in the Boulder Creek, Santa Cruz area. A team of brilliant scientists and cardiologists determined how to actually detect with a simple sensor that goes on the earlobe to detect the signals that are being generated by the unconscious nervous system through measuring the heartbeat and the regularity of the the beat of the heart rate. And so what we're going to do is we're going to ask Corinne to put this on her earlobe, and this is attached to the computer here, and it will begin reading her unconscious nervous system in about every 100th of a second. It'll give us a reading and it'll display it on the screen. So perhaps for the first time, Corinne will actually see her unconscious nervous system, and she'll see what proportion of it is stressed and which proportion is not. And then we'll go through a biofeedback exercise and we'll see if it changes.
You know, I'm really anxious to see with her because I know Corinne, and she seems like the calmest person I've ever met. She's got a really nice, calm, balanced way about her. So it'll be interesting to see. She's off the scales with stress. It would be funny. So,
Yeah.
Well, now that
why
you
don't you
said
hook her
that.
up? Hook her up, and we'll see
Okay,
what comes
so
up.
Corinne, if you'll just
All
put
right.
that on your earlobe, and then this just goes on your scarf or your collar.
Okay.
And so this is called a heart rate variability session. It may take a minute here to warm up. And what we're really looking at are the two sides of the unconscious nervous system in Corinne's body, mind, and heart right now. And the sympathetic part of your unconscious nervous system is that part which mediates the fight-flight response. And the hormones adrenaline and cortisol are responsible for filling your bloodstream with all those hormones, and they generate your ability to put oxygen into your blood and into your cells and to focus your energy, dilate your pupils, and get you ready to fight or flee.
Okay.
And if you did that all the time, your cells wouldn't be able to restore, rest, and relax and repair themselves. So that's where the parasympathetic comes in. And what we're just seeing right now is the first display of your heart rate variability, and I'll explain that in a minute. So when your parasympathetic nervous system comes into play, your body has a chance to rest, restore, and repair itself.
Ernie, may I
Yes.
interrupt you just for a moment?
Yes.
Because I think it'd be fun for Corinne to know that she can watch on the monitor
Oh,
here.
okay.
And you can watch yourself how it's going.
And should I just speak to the monitor then?
No.
Maya versus here? Or
No,
what?
no, whatever you feel
okay.
comfortable doing.
Well, so I can look at it here. But what we're looking at, if we just take a zebra or an antelope that is a happy, healthy mammal on the Serengeti, it is always aware that there might be a cheetah in the bushes. So its sympathetic nervous system is alive and well. It's not in a deep meditative state, but it can be grazing and enjoying the beautiful day and eating. And so if you look at the pattern of their heart rate, it would go up as they were being alert, and it would go down as they were resting and eating. And so it would form a very nice sine wave. And when you are in a highly coherent state, like those animals, your pattern here would be a sine wave. It would go up and down in a very natural pattern, and you see that it's really not forming much of a natural pattern right now. And in fact, if you look down on the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that approximately 72% of your unconscious nervous system is not coherent. It's not balanced between the two systems.
Oh, okay.
It's being dominated by your sympathetic nervous system, possibly because of the setting that we're in, possibly because of something that happened today. Some people endure chronic stress because of finances or relationships, and I see this all the time, especially with older people. So what we're looking at here is the typical pattern of someone who is under what I would call moderate stress. You notice that the green bar over on the far right is registering 0, which means that really there's nothing that is highly coherent in your autonomic nervous system right now. And
Do
so
you
now,
understand what he's telling you with that?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Can you give it back to us, Corinne? What he was saying about the green?
Well, he's saying that there's something that's going on right now, or something that happened today, that I'm in a bit of a stress mode. I mean,
Right, and
yeah.
one way to look at that is that your sympathetic nervous system is firing quite strongly right
Yeah.
now, and it is preventing the parasympathetic from activating. It's like a dance between the two systems. And so in an ideal world, the two one would back off a little bit, so the sympathetic would back off and let yourself repair cells and restore, and then you would come up, it would back off, and your sympathetic would say, okay, let's make sure that we're not going to hit a car here. And you know, I
Right.
call it the red
Right.
light in the rear view mirror syndrome. When that happens, your sympathetic kicks in.
Yeah.
And then when the police car goes around and gets somebody else instead of you, your parasympathetic kicks in. So what you'll find that happens is, and let me just ask you, if you are startled, is your inclination to breathe in or out? If someone were to burst into the room right now,
Probably breathe in.
you would instinctively go like this. And what you're doing is you're instinctively bringing oxygen into your lungs so that your muscles can be equipped with oxygen so that you can respond. And now if the threat were to disappear, what would be your response?
Exhale.
It's just a natural response. And what you're doing is you're exhaling, the oxygen is returning to the center of your body, and your parasympathetic is kicking in. So that's what the breathing is, the relationship between your breathing, your heart rate, and your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are all being measured by this system right now. And so what we're seeing here, and you can see these spikes that are occurring, well, that's where your heart rate went way up all of a sudden. And we still don't see much of a pattern here. So shall we try a little biofeedback?
Yes, let's
Okay.
do. Let's do.
So this is just a very standard coaching process, Corinne. And what I'd like you to do is, first of all, just take in a nice deep breath and just get relaxed and realize that we're going to just be focusing on your heart. In fact, I'd like you to imagine that your heart is actually in the center of your chest. And I'd like you to have your eyes open, by the way, because we don't want you to go into deep meditation. This is more about a nice, even balance. But imagine that your heart is in the center of your chest so that when you breathe in, you can feel air going right into your heart and your lungs, kind of like it's the same organ. You're honoring your heart as part of this process. It's called heart-centered breathing. It's a very important part of this process. Now I want you to breathe in and feel the air going in and out, and just find a comfortable breathing pace. And the second phase of this, while you're focusing on heart-centered breathing, is to think of a person or a place or a time in your life when you just couldn't have been happier. So this is about gratitude. This is about joy. This is about peace in your life. I know where that was. It was a location for me when I was a little boy, and I always go back to that place. For some people, it's a person in their life. It might be your partner, your mate, your children. Could be just a time, an era in your life. But we want to just basically fill your body and your mind with gratitude, because gratitude is a very important part of managing stress. So now we're heart-centered breathing. We're remembering and focusing on a time and a place in your life. And now I want you to look at the screen and notice that you've started setting up a little sine wave there. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I see that.
And now what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to, when that sine wave drops to the bottom and you think it's about ready to go up, I'd like you to take in a nice deep breath, just a comfortable deep breath, and watch what happens to the curve. And then right about there, let it out. Nice and long and slow. And right about now, you'd breathe in again, up, and right there it's saying, I need to go down. So it's telling you where it needs to go. And you can just kind of watch it, and then what you're doing with your breathing now is you're nurturing your heart rate to its natural coherent state. And you see that beautiful sine wave you've created there now. And that is called coherence. And what you've demonstrated to me right off the bat is that you can achieve coherence in a first time in front of lights and a camera, which is pretty amazing. And I think Maya's instincts about your ability to be de-stressed are right. You'll notice down here in the blue, that's your cumulative coherence. So you're already green up to 6 now. and you'll notice that you're adding coherence. So what's happening to your entire unconscious nervous system is it is finding its natural unstressed center. And it's all been done in an interesting way by your consciously changing your breathing. And you're actually affecting the rate with which your heart is beating and the signals that it's sending out to your brain and to your digestive tract and to your whole body. So people will use this while they're in traffic. People will use this when they're going to sleep, when they're waking up. My goal is to be coherently breathing 100% of my life. And what I find is that I do it unconsciously more and more because it feels so good. And so I'll catch myself breathing coherently. And I realize that I'm actually training myself to de-stress because it's rewarding me because my body feels better. And so this is a very good first pattern, and you're up to 8 already, and I'm sure if you were to continue doing this, that you would get up to eventually 99 to 100%.
Wow.
But that's a short example of how HeartMath works.
Fabulous, absolutely fabulous. How do you feel, Corinne?
Consider the circumstances, I feel pretty relaxed. I mean,
But I mean, I've done this with Ernie, by the way, and mine was all over the place. So I'm amazed what you've done here today. Just amazed. So she really is a very calm person.
Yes.
Probably this is just who she is.
Now, if I were to work with Corinne, what I would suggest is that we would work on perfecting this so that when you came to a session, you would already know. We wouldn't have to go through what we just did informationally, but we would basically work on achieving that over extended periods of time, and then we would work on increasing what's called the amplitude so that your high beats would be higher and your low beats would be lower. And when you achieve that, you're essentially expressing stress at the level of young people who are able to manage it naturally.
right.
Thank you, Corinne, for helping us, with
You're
us
welcome.
today. That was great. That was great. Well, we've been talking about vitality in stress, but vitality really has even more to it, and that's vitality in nutrition. And author John Robbins has been writing books on this subject for many, many years, and he's got so many books out. And here's what he has to say about it.
Over the last 25 years, John Robbins' books about healthy eating and healthy living, including blockbuster bestseller Diet for a New America, have sold millions of copies and been translated into more than 30 languages. He's made hundreds of local and national radio and television appearances, spoken in person to hundreds of thousands of people, founded Earth Save International, and received dozens of awards for his work on behalf of healthy people and a healthy planet. John's latest book, Healthy at 100, explores how we can dramatically increase our lifespan and health span. Here's an excerpt from his website about vitality and aging.
When I did the research that led to writing Healthy at 100, I wasn't surprised to find out that diet plays a huge role in our health, that exercise plays a huge role. I've written about these things in the past, studied them, lived them, conversed with many, many people about them. But what did surprise me was the enormous importance that connectivity with other people has on our health and well-being physically as we grow older. Not just emotionally, not just psychologically, but medically, in terms of our physical well-being. The rates of illness that correspond, and lethal illness, that correspond to loneliness, to not having positive connections with other people, not having positive, meaningful relationships with others. The list is long and inclusive. What we're learning is that loneliness kills people. It kills them faster than cigarettes do. Is you see the people, you look for the people who are living fabulous lives, energetic lives, vibrant lives, creative lives, caring lives, making a contribution to their communities, to their families, to the greater good of society in countless ways, whatever age they are.
So our takeaway from this segment today is we can increase senior vitality by staying connected and continuing to contribute wherever we can. For Golden Agers, this is Ed Dudkowski.
Well, John Robbins has made quite an impact in his 66 years on the planet. And doesn't he look wonderful and youthful? I mean, I guess the diet is working for him. He's a vegetarian. I mean, what do you think, Ernie? Is that the way to go?
Well, good question, Maya. Working with thousands of people in the Bay Area over the last 10 years on the subject of their vitality, their nutrition, their weight, I've encountered almost every food philosophy that exists, I think. I've even dealt with breatharians who live off of air and sunlight, or so they say.
Is that possible, really?
Or so they say.
I mean, I've heard breatharians, but have you ever seen one?
Well, I haven't been able to figure out where they're getting the carbon, but that's probably a subject for another discussion. Now, I know a number of vegetarians who are very healthy, and the big challenge for vegetarians, of course, is their protein. And a vegetarian who intends to remain a vegetarian for the rest of their life needs to be sure that they're getting adequate protein, and it is a challenge for some vegetarians and vegans. And I deal a lot with that, and one of the measurement systems that I use to measure body composition is very useful for them because they can tell whether they're losing lean body mass or not, and if they are, they can make adjustments. There are many different kinds of diet, as you know. The paleo diet is a very popular one these days. I've just coined one called the Neolithic diet. Because the Neolithic humans were the ones who were making the transition from hunters and gatherers to agriculture. And I maintain there are very few true Paleolithic consumers these days because most of the food that they're eating was grown on a farm or a garden. And that would have placed them as more Neolithic. So all of the different diets that are adaptable to people's food philosophies and their belief about everything from the quality of their food to the environment, I have total respect for those. The truth of the matter is that cells need to be nourished no matter what your food philosophy is. So ultimately, I like to listen to the cells and the tissues that they form in order to determine whether or not they're being adequately nourished.
Ernie, I have a question. Elephants are probably the biggest animals on the planet, and they're vegetarians. I mean, they graze.
They're vegans.
So how, where do they get their protein to be so massive?
I was asked that very question by a vegan not too long ago, and they said, okay, elephants, cattle, deer are all vegans, and look at the muscle. And my response is, and if you want to eat every waking minute of your life to get your adequate protein, I understand that because that's what they're doing. And they're eating plants which typically do not have high protein. You don't see elephants eating a lot of nuts and seeds even. They're mainly eating grasses and vegetative matter. And that requires a very high volume of consumption in order to extract the amino acids that are needed by the body, as opposed to a carnivorous lion, for example, that obtains a lot of protein from eating the meat of other animals. So it's really a question of where your protein is coming from, and the reason I focus on that, just at the outset of this conversation, is that for people in their later years, older than 55 years old, it is now well known that most of them are not getting adequate protein, and that's why they're losing lean body mass, irrespective of their food philosophy. So even carnivores are oftentimes not getting adequate protein to replace the cells that are being lost. And this is a conversation I have with every person I deal with these days, every person who I see. After I ask them about their trace minerals, I ask them, tell me what you're doing with your protein. In your food philosophy, where are you getting your protein? How much are you getting? And I'd say 95% of the people I talk to do not know how much protein they're getting, nor how much they need, nor how much is in the food that they're eating. So we have a good time talking about that for 15 or 20 minutes, and we usually emerge with a good plan that is consistent with their food philosophy.
Why don't we get into your philosophy now, as far as what you think we should be doing so that we stay vital to our 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s beyond?
Well, so it's important to realize that the factors that affect our vitality, there are three major categories. The first one is your genetics, the genetic hand that you were dealt by nature. And you can only do so much with that. The field of epigenetics now that's emerging is suggesting that you can do more than we originally thought. By modifying your environment, you can affect the expression of your genes. But once your genes have expressed themselves, they have to express themselves in our environment, which in the center of this slide is exhibited by our nutrition, our lifestyle, and our environment. So the presence of toxins in our environment, for example, and in our food can dramatically affect our vitality. The degree to which we live active lifestyles can affect that. But if the focus for this part of the discussion here is on nutrition, that really gets down to the basic elements that your cells need in order to be able to function and perform the myriad of tasks that they have to function, and to have enough energy and building blocks to make another cell when they die. So a lot of people don't realize it, but every 7 years we replace all the cells in our body. And I like to tell people, you're never really older than 7. The question is, how many times have you been 7? And how are you doing on this cycle? So my goal is to help people in their 7-year cycle replace as many healthy cells as they can through proper nutrition. And trace minerals are at the foundation of that, obviously. And then eating, as John Robbins does, a largely plant-based diet. In his case, at this point, I think it's probably all plants, but I'm not quite sure about that. I know in his book, Healthy at 100, the cultures that he studied ate, I think, between 95 and 99% of their calories came from plants. So meat was not a big part of their diet, but they were obviously getting adequate protein because they were living to be 110, 115 years old, climbing up the hills, chasing the goats, and dying in their sleep with a smile on their face. And that's one of the core messages of John's book, Healthy at 100. So we have the overall vitality in our lives is a combination of our genetics and our environment, and nutrition is one of the 3 pillars of our environment, and we have a great deal of control over that. So it's interesting to note that some geneticists and statisticians have calculated that it would take the human genome about 1 million years to genetically adapt to the decline that our diet has undergone in the last 250 years. Our diet has degenerated to such an extent in many of our modern cultures that we would have to have about 1 million years of genetic modification to even adapt to that. There's no way we can ever catch up with that, so we have to go back to changing our diet rather than relying upon our genetics.
You mean I have to give up my Twinkies?
That's your food philosophy, Maya. I'm not going to tell you what to eat, but I will tell you that it's probably got no protein in it.
I know Jack LaLanne was a sugar addict in his beginning days.
Right.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about him.
Well, I know that one of Jack's standards was if it's in a package or a can, don't eat it. I mean, he had a solid rule. He was absolutely opposed to processed foods. I'm not sure if Jack was eating an omnivorous diet or a vegan or vegetarian diet, but the closer we can get to food in its natural state, and the more adequately we can nourish ourselves with the natural compounds provided in fruits, vegetables, seeds, and if your philosophy is to eat fish or chicken, if it's to eat red meat, then the quality of that has to be of preeminent importance, especially given the toxins, heavy metals, pesticides, hormones that are in our food system these days. So I think we are fortunate to live in an area in Marin, in the North Bay, and in the broader Bay Area, where this is really important to people. And I'm just so honored to be able to work with people because I've been focusing on this for the last 10 years as a scientist, not as a nutritionist per se, not as a physician. I've been looking at the effect of nutrition in the body as it affects the vitality of cells, tissues, and ultimately the whole body, so that it can achieve even the highest levels of vitality on into our later years.
You know, I think Jack LaLanne is probably a wonderful role model in that he lived into his 90s, didn't he, Corinne?
I think so.
I mean, he got up there, and yet he was very physical. I mean, he was always exercising, and he seemed to be really vital. I think most people would be happy to age the way he did.
Well, I just make an observation that in the measurements I've done, and this is about 10,000 people, I've measured their body composition. And in our younger years, typically healthy young people are approximately 40% of their weight is living tissue. It's skin, it's muscle, it's liver, it's brain, and about 20% of it is fat. 40% of it is bones, ligaments, and extracellular fluids. And what happens to many people is that as their cells die in that 7-year cycle, they are often not replaced. And so by the time someone hits 55, they don't have 40% of their body weight as living tissue anymore. They only have 30%. And by the time people are in their 60s, it may be only 25. Well, I measured a 100-year-old woman who was only 23% of her weight was living tissue, and the rest was fat, bones, and water. So the replenishment of living body cells is at the heart of healthy aging, and it becomes increasingly important starting at the age of 35, but by the time we hit 55, we need to have our hands on that steering wheel so firmly, and it has to be a priority. If your goal is to live well on into your 80s, 90s, and 100s, you need to focus on that, because you will not see people healthy in their hundreds who are devoid of a lot of body tissue. The reason Jack LaLanne was so active was that he had a lot of cells in his body.
And was that, do you think, primarily because he was such an exercise enthusiast? I mean,
Well,
he sort of started exercise in America.
Right, and I think that a lot of people believe that is one of the core answers, and I would just counter that slightly by saying that Jack was also eating very well. And the fact that he was very muscular is to his credit to some extent, but if you look at the cultures that John Robbins studied in Healthy at 100, and you look at photographs of these older people, they're not muscle men and women. They are not particularly muscled. They're not particularly thin, they're not particularly fat, but they have a high percentage of their weight as body cells. And by body cells, I mean not only skin and muscle, but I'm talking about their livers were fully formed livers with plump cells that were able to talk. And so
Lots of water.
this goes back to the water. This goes back to the hydration.
You were just talking about.
Right, and to the electrolytes that activate those pumps that we were talking about earlier in this program. So my goal is not to try and cook the books with exercise. As important as that is, I think it's part of an overall plan, but it's awfully easy for people because it's also helpful with stress reduction to exercise. So a lot of people I have met will exercise to an excess in relation to the amount of energy and focus that they're putting on their core nutrition. And somewhere in the middle is the balance. I mean, you don't see zebras out there running just for the heck of it. And you don't see them lifting weights, right? Although elephants have to do a lot of that just to get up when they're after they've been lying down.
Well, this is John Robbins' book, and how amazing. I forget how many books he's written, but it's just a vast amount of books. And Healthy at 100, I think is really important for people that are watching our show, because it's definitely not for people who are over 100. It's get this kind of thinking going early on. And it's how you can, at any age, dramatically increase your lifespan and your health span. So, Ernie, continue on, please, with your presentation.
Sure. I would just echo what you said about John's book. That's a delightful book, and it's my wife and I read one chapter a day, and it was just, we couldn't put it down. Well, just to comment again about hydration and nutrition. This is an example of a cell in the upper left-hand corner here, and this could be a skin cell or a muscle cell. And these, we have 100 trillion of these in our bodies, give or take. It's a miracle that 100 trillion living entities can form thousands of different cell types and hundreds of different organs and tissue types, and all be functioning together so that we can be sitting here actually talking and functioning and speaking and thinking. But on the membranes of each of these cells, so if you look under an electron microscope and look at the membrane that separates the inside of the cell from the outside, this is where a lot of the action is. This is where the cell is taking in nutrients, it's pumping in electrolytes, it's excreting toxins, it's recognizing other cells, and this cell membrane is why omega-3 fatty acids are so important, because they form the basis for healthy cell membranes. So I spend a lot of my time focusing on the health of the cell membrane and the balance of nutrients and water between those. This is just a quick slide showing
Who's
you.
this good-looking man?
Well, this is an experiment that I started back in 2006 when I weighed 192 pounds, and I decided it was about time that I did something about it. And I went into a major study about how to reduce body fat. And what I didn't learn at that time, and the reason I focused so much on protein, was that by 2008, I'd lost about 42 pounds, but I'd lost 10 pounds of body cells. And what I hadn't done was supply adequate protein into my diet while I was burning fat. So what you see by 2014, I gained back quite a bit of weight, but I had gained back mostly body cells. And without doing a lot of excessive exercise, what I'm doing now, my goal for the end of 2014, is to reduce my body fat and gain body cells through a balanced approach. And I'm actually doing it. I'm 173 this morning, and I'm on my way to 169. I'm losing 1 pound of fat a week and gaining about 1 pound of body cells a month. And at the end of this year, I should be measuring on my own instruments like a 35-year-old, and I'll be 65 on the 2nd of December.
Well, you're an excellent example of your work, Ernie. Well, I really want to thank you both for being here today. It's really been wonderful. Thank you for being our subject.
You're welcome. It's been very interesting.
And Ernie, you know, you've got so much in that head of yours. I think we have to have you back again, and we have to continue this, because
I'd be honored.
we've only gotten through such a small part of really what you have to tell us. And we hope that you will visit Ernie's website, to livewellmarin.org. Towards pages. Just have fun with the possibility of being younger and more vital. And you'll also find this ebook on his site, The Vital Journey. In it will be much of what we talked about today. It's a great way to follow up on what you've seen and heard here. Well, that's it for our show today. Until we meet again, remember what William Blake said: exuberance is beauty. I'm Maya Cooper. Make it a vital week. See you next time.